today, James and I are here with a very special guest, someone who I've tried to have on for a while, but we're glad he's finally able to be on. We have the making of Star Wars, making of Indiana Jones, longtime Lucas Publishing editor and writer, Mr. Jonathan Rinzler.
Thank you, and
welcome to the show.
For tenacity.
We've learned since we do a lot of voice actors that sometimes that takes a while because like with a voice actor, they don't know when they're going to be busy and when they're not. Auditions happen all the time, so you have to have the tenacity to make it work.
And, absolutely. But you know what? We're just glad to have you on finally. It's a real pleasure, sir.
Well, I'm glad to be on, and yeah, it's true. Deadlines are a factor too, and I have 2 deadlines right now. So I sound tense. That's why.
It's a little tense, ladies and gentlemen. Don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Well, deadlines indeed are something. So I guess actually this will reflect a listener question that that I think will work on that statement. He just wants to know, when you're writing a book like any of your making of books, we've heard that with a lot of Star Wars books and fiction in general, sometimes the deadlines are really quick. Sometimes you have a matter of like a month or two, sometimes a couple of months. If you're lucky, you have a year. What sort of deadlines do they usually set when you're making one of these making of books which you've been working on throughout much of your life?
Right. Most of my life. Well, a lot of my working life anyway.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, they vary. I mean, they really vary. I mean, overall, I've had fairly reasonable deadlines. The making of Episode 3, I was sort of working on it for years, but then when it finally it was time to do the manuscript, it was quite sudden in a way, because I wasn't supposed to be writing that book, which is a long story, and then they had to be done before the movie was actually out, which would cause complications. And then the next one, for the making of Star Wars, I didn't have much time between when I pitched it and when the manuscript had to be done. But then for the other books, I had a good year and a half, so I had more time for them, and I knew a little bit more what I was doing. But then of course it took more time because I was laying out the book myself, choosing, actually doing the book map, and but overall it's pretty good. I mean, the sound of Star Wars is pretty bad. Blueprints is pretty bad. When I was doing blueprints, I was also doing the 2 Clone Wars scripts. And I got pneumonia. I got so stressed out, which didn't help. Not a good.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just totally sick, but yeah, I got this.
Yeah, exactly. That's my solution.
That's really cool. Well, as sort of a little bit of a follow-up to that question, get a little bit more specific. Of all the things that you've written, what was really your shortest turnaround time where they said, like, we need it by this time, and you were like, all right, I'll give it a shot, and you actually made it?
I think it was that period where I got pneumonia. I think it was the Blueprints book and the combination with because I didn't know when I was going to have to write those scripts. I had been in, I think it was 4th season story meetings, which went on for 2 weeks with all the writers and George, and we didn't get to mine because George knew I was, around the corner, so to speak. So he kind of put them off, and then suddenly I got the call and went to a meeting with Christian Taylor, I think was his name, and Dave Filoni and George, and we just broke it down and okay, we need this, and I forget what it was, but it was like 10 days or less.
How?
And but on the other hand, I learned that writing a TV script is a lot less work, and you get paid a lot more money than doing one of these making up books.
It's like, give me the money.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I'll get pneumonia. Not that it was, I was getting paid scale, but still compared to the making of books where I calculated I got like $2.50 an hour or something. I'm not complaining.
So, being that, by the time you got to write those Clone Wars scripts, that being they were for the Lost missions, they were the Jar Jar.
Right,
arc.
Yeah, George told me I had to rehabilitate Jar Jar.
Or as one of my friends say, the fact that Jar Jar gets more action than I do.
Yeah, which is really sad. And thank you, by the way, Jeremiah, for not naming me by name. I mean, what? Moving on.
But being that by that time you had done so many making of Star Wars books, a lot of these behind the scenes books with Star Wars, you'd done gotten all these stories about George Lucas and how the movies were made and so on. Did you find it easier for you to write those scripts because you had been you knew more about Star Wars than most people in general?
Oh yeah, definitely compared to the other writers, most of them. I mean, some of them know quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, I knew it, and I also knew how George's mind worked. It was George's idea, incidentally, to have Jar Jar kissing the Queen and have them be sort of an item. I understood pretty much where he's coming from, and that's why I think also he let me do the comic book adaptation of the rough draft. You guys know about that, right?
Yeah, the Star Wars, the comic based on the original draft for A New Hope.
Oh yeah,
right. It's a little bit different take on the story.
And I personally enjoy that to no end. I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, people criticize it, saying, "Well, it's really terrible." Well, the whole point was it is kind of terrible. It's just this is what it was, and it's just interesting to see how it started, and it was very visual. So George agreed after I basically talked him into it and showed him what it could look like. So I really feel like I have having been there for a long time and gotten to know George, in a sense. Yes, I did feel fairly confident doing it. Although my script, to be honest, is not what ended up on screen. They changed it quite a bit. There's very little left of what I wrote.
Well, I know Dave Filoni and others, as they go through it, they have to, I don't know, they tweak things to make sure it works, but I guess sometimes they tweak a lot.
Yeah, and so Dave knows what he's doing, the director knows what he's doing, and that's goes with the territory.
So you said that it was George's idea to have Jar Jar kissing the Queen. So he was like, "So we need Jar Jar. He needs to have a love interest, and they're gonna French. Lots of."
Sorry, that's just great.
Yeah, well, it's more or less what happened.
that just seems to be like something that he'd say, and then I just sit there and go, "What? Are you kidding?" But there was an interesting arc. You also got to delve into Mother Talzin, the stuff which his daughter actually really dived into. Did you have any input from Katie Lucas for Mother Talzin, or is that all from from Filoni and George?
That was Dave and maybe the director. I don't know. But definitely Filoni. I didn't have much to do with that part, and I had to rewrite it completely at one point because first George said it was going to be sort of like Temple of Doom, and then it wasn't, and then it was again. So, but again, I'm not complaining. It was a great experience. I mean, to be working on that with George Lucas and Dave is a once in a lifetime experience.
And so writing that arc, you got to draw on your experience, not just with Star Wars, knowing these prequel characters especially, and knowing Mace Windu with the Revenge of the Sith one, but you also got to dive into your making of Indiana Jones background, so you got to use both of your Lucasfilm backgrounds to form one story arc. Right, I got to wear two hats, and also it was fun to do fiction. I wrote an Indiana Jones novel a while back, The Mystery of Mount Sinai, for Scholastic. And that was a lot of fun. And then actually now that I no longer work at Lucasfilm, I'm working on my own novel, which is presently out with readers, and I'm getting good feedback, which is exciting. And I hope to send it out, to agents and publishers in about a month, or a little bit more, 6 weeks or so. Was the Mystery of Mount Sinai novel the one with the Nazi with a robot arm on the cover?
Right, yeah, I got to resurrect him. That was a lot of fun, and I got Greg Knight to do the illustration for the cover, and he did a great job. That was really fun.
And if I recall right, that one you were using ideas that you had found that were rejected from the Indiana Jones Vader's Lost Ark, and that you had uncovered in the making of Indiana Jones, correct? And so you got to reuse some of those as the after series for Crystal Skull?
Sorry, what's the question? Just the...
Well, I'm just saying with that one, isn't a lot of the ideas for Mystery of Mount Sinai stuff that was rejected or removed from Raiders of the Lost Ark that you had talked about in your making of Indiana Jones book?
No, only the evil character guy.
Just the robotic arm.
Yeah, the robotic arm guy. No, the rest of the story was for me.
Okay.
I mean, obviously,
and then,
in a Jones-esque, it was Indy-esque. I thought it would fit. But yeah, no, none of those ideas were from the monkey skull or whatever the hell it was. 27 different scripts they wrote for Crystal Skull. Nope.
20.
I didn't have time to go through those.
Wow.
Right?
Do you ever wish you could have gone through all those Crystal Skull scripts, or just you don't want to go through how?
No, I mean, it was literally George brought it out, and I think very few people have probably seen it. It was a box. There were upwards of 20 scripts in there. It looked like.
Jeebus.
I mean, talk about deadlines. I didn't have much time on that book, and I had to do 4 films. Plus a film, one of the films is one they're actually working on. Quickly, but I had Laurent Bouzereau doing the interviews, so that helped.
Oh, thank God for that. I mean, geez, no offense, but if I were in your position, I'd be like, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I mean, that's kind of crazy when you really think about it. I mean, hats off to you, sir, because there's many of us that aspire to be writers. We couldn't even fathom being in that position, like, anytime soon.
Well, I mean, it's not that easy. You have to be able to make decisions very quickly as you're going through a whole bunch of box loads of stuff. You have to. It's like you have to, in a way, become a computer. It's like you're, part of the book, not part of the book, part of the book, not part of the book. And the thing is, though, I pitched for years publishers, and basically, I mean, I could have got a publisher, but I couldn't persuade Lucasfilm to do a giant Art of Indiana Jones book, because there's still quite a bit of art, a lot of art actually, and blueprints in the archive. And I think they want to wait till they do the next film to do something like that.
So when you're working on, and this is something I'm really curious, because your making of books, be it Star Wars, be it Indiana Jones, are extremely thorough. They're much more thorough than the usual stuff we get from DK or just making of books in general of different movies and video games and so on that they do.
So true.
So they let you into the, I'm assuming they let you into the archives to look at stuff, but how do you decide out of all that? I'm assuming there's tons and tons of stuff there, like what goes in the book, what does it, and how hard of a decision it is to actually formulate this book with so much information that I'm quite sure you can't even dive through probably a good chunk of it to just make these stories.
Well, except for the Crystal Skull scripts, which I really couldn't go through, I go through all of it, every single piece of paper for the Star Wars book and really for the Indiana Jones book, except for the Crystal Skull. You just the reason why it was possible is really ultimately thanks to George, because he had a structure where people were pretty flexible, and they allowed me to do my editing job, which was really what I was getting paid for. But if I had to go to the archive, I'd make a deal with my boss and say I need to be there Tuesday and Wednesday or whatever it was. And almost all the time, except for towards the end when Disney was kind of taking over, I was able to do that. And then I would work, mornings, nights, and weekends. But really, if you came in as an outsider, first of all, you never know where the stuff is, and they would not trust you. They wouldn't allow you in. They wouldn't have the trust. And then, two, it wouldn't be financially feasible, because you'd have to pay the writer. You'd have to pay the writer to live for almost a year, and no publisher can afford that, because the books, even though they do well, the margin is just not there, which is why most making of books are pretty awful, because the writer has given a bunch of EPKs or has 1 week to interview everybody and then 3 weeks to write the book. And, what kind of book are you going to get with that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I could totally understand that. Although, if I may transition to something just a little bit nerdy, if you will, to be able to actually, when they told you, yes, you can go to the archives and actually get into the archives and see all that there is to see. I mean, did that like do anything to you, like from like a fan standpoint? Like, wow, I'm looking at something that like many people will never get the chance to see. Like, was there any sort of emotional response to that?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I would often come back from work and say to my wife, you know, there are people I got paid to do today what some people would pay $10,000 to do. You know, it was incredible. And yeah, the archives are this incredible place. There's the Ark of the Covenant is there, and all these amazing models, and stuff from American Graffiti and THX and the Ewok movies, and matte painting. I mean, it's really just an amazing place. And that's just the part that they show people. I mean, not people, but people like VIPs come, or, you know, so-and-so, president or whatever, gets a personal tour. But then there's the production archives, which nobody ever sees, which has the Universal and Paramount libraries that George bought, you know, the old style reference libraries for computers. So if you wanted to know menu looks like in the 1920s Brooklyn deli, you can pull out a drawer and pull out an actual menu. There's also the legal archives, which is really just a big room with a bunch of files. But the production archives are boxes and boxes and boxes. As I have to use the end of Raiders visual for what that looks like. And we've shown it in a few videos, but nobody ever goes in there because visually there's nothing to see. It's just boxes. But once you open the boxes, there's, you know, and again, it's not models or amazing art, you know, but it's you find stuff. That's where you find the interviews, and you find memos and telexes that people sent, which are part of the drama of how they made the movies. And then there's also there's sort of a licensing archive. They're kind of scattered throughout, so you had to know where to look. But you know, in the production archives, I once found 2 pieces of Ralph McQuarrie artwork. You know, sketches
no way.
For licensing covers, yeah, that had been misfiled. So that was fun.
That's amazing.
Or you'd find this incredible, you know, one of those giant European posters of the Italian version of Return of the Jedi, just again in the wrong box. Because people would put stuff away and then you'd never see it again. And then, of course, the actual archive, we would find there were boxes that had been sealed 30 years ago. And then for my project, or also for the costumes book that we did, that Brandon Allinger wrote and I edited, we opened boxes and he found one of the original lightsabers from, you know, 1976 with the sort of day glow tape on it. And we were able to put it in a lightsaber handle and take photographs, and it would glow just from the reflection of the light from the camera. It was incredible. And we found the original Yoda, which was all, you know, basically everything except the eyeballs.
Oh my goodness. Oh, yeah, tell us more, please. What I got to ask you, out of all the things that everybody that you know of or that you yourself have found in there, what's like just the craziest oddball thing you found? I got to know.
Well, I think I just told you. I think those were the 2 ones. I'm trying to think what else there
Fair
was.
Enough.
I mean, I found a couple of Ralph McQuarrie paintings that had never been published before. Because what happened was there was a big exhibit that the Smithsonian did, and they just took tons of stuff out of the drawers that were organized, and then they chose out of that stuff the stuff that would be in the exhibit, but then they just all the stuff they pulled just sat in these Smithsonian drawers. And so some of that stuff, it just wasn't in the exhibit, and then had not been looked through whenever they did any of the other books. And so there were a couple Ralph McQuarrie paintings, which I discovered, which were in my book, one of which I misidentified. I thought it was from Empire, and it turns out it was a really early painting from Star Wars. So there's a new book coming out in just a month. You know, there's a 2-volume Ralph McQuarrie book coming out, and which I didn't write. I edited, and Brandon and David Mandel and Wade Josie wrote it, and they have everything in the right place. It's the ultimate Ralph book. But those two paintings wouldn't be in that book if if I hadn't found them earlier, and so on and so forth.
So I'm curious, just because I know if I was in the archive and I saw the Ark of the Covenant, my first attempt would be, does it open, and what happens?
Nobody opens it.
I'm assuming it doesn't quite open because of the way the model works, or maybe there's two different ones?
It's literally because of the film curse. Nobody wants to open it.
Seriously,
open it.
I don't
nobody, the archivists, I don't know if any of them actually have opened it, but they say that in general, they don't open it. As far as I know, they've never opened it.
Wow.
Isn't that funny?
That's hilarious because I'm pretty sure me and him are the same way. We'd be in front of it and just sit there and go, dude, do we want to do this? And you'd be like, well, maybe we'd risk it. And I'd be like, I'm already going deaf, man. I don't want to go blind.
Right. I mean, the other thing is, of course, is you're not supposed to touch the models and fool around with them. So, I never looked inside.
So this is a listener question, and they said, having recently read the behind-the-scenes book of Shadows of the Empire, and then read the book that you did with the Art of the Force Unleashed, yours seemed to be much more a much more open approach to how they've done LucasArts making of games, especially with how you edited Rogue Leaders, the story of LucasArts. Bringing you in as an editor, was that one of their main goals, to make it so they can improve their behind-the-scenes books, improve some of these making-of books to make it more thorough, or is that just something you brought in yourself and changed the way Lucas Publishing worked?
That was something that I brought in, not to blow my own horn too much, but yeah, I really liked when I was growing up books like the Jaws log, and there was another one, a great book on Blade Runner, which I read much later. I forget what it's called. But which are really fairly honest books about behind the scenes. There's another one about the Bonfire of the Vanities, and they were much more interesting books to read than just a book that goes over how they did every visual effects shot, which is interesting, but ultimately kind of boring, because production is a lot more interesting than that. And so I talked to Rick McCallum about it, and just as they were about to start episode 3, he said, yeah, let's do one of those kind of books. And then because I got to know George and I understood that he didn't mind, particularly if it's happened 30 years ago, people are a lot more relaxed about it, and let's be honest. But even episode 3, he understood that, making a movie causes friction, because you have one person who wants to do it basically his way, and people are, bent out of shape about it, and a lot of strong personalities, and it's nothing. Everybody knows it, but yet studios want to pretend like everybody's holding hands and singing, Hallelujah every morning, which is absurd.
I don't think I know a single movie when you I think it was Cameron wrote a book about making Avatar, and even the director never says that everyone was Hallelujah, but I guess the studio, their goal is to make everyone think that every movie is perfect when they make it, don't they?
It's so true.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the reasons is because the marketing department control essentially what goes out in terms of licensing, and they're overall, just way too, concerned about image, which nobody's buying in the first place anyway. And it just ends up making everybody look kind of silly. Whereas if you are honest about it, then readers appreciate the book more, and so for Rogue Leaders, we had a really good writer, and he told he had his stories and his sources, and I would double check things, and I don't think for that one, I don't even know if George wanted to read that one, but I think I showed it. I think I showed it to Lucasfilm PR, but they didn't change anything. I don't think they changed a single word. And I think, because I had George's confidence, they would sort of have confidence in me, and I showed it to Legal, and Lucasfilm, before Disney took it over, they were just concerned with whether we were committing libel or something. As long as we were saying the truth, or some version of some person's truth, then it was fine. And it was very relaxed, and there was very little friction in terms of getting those books out. But then when Disney came aboard, it was quite different.
Well, it's a more corporate machine. They have whole fleets of lawyers, and they've just been around longer. They have a different way of running things. But we've interviewed people like Daniel Wallace and Ryder Wyndham and so on about Jedi Path and some of these other books. As an executive editor for a lot of these published books, what sort of input do you have on the direction some of these books went that you're the editor of versus the writer?
I had, which books are we talking about? The Ryder Wyndham?
Like Jedi Path, Book of Sith, those more narrative.
Yeah, the ones that are sort of more about what used to be called the expanded universe. I would, if I was the editor, I would sort of, in those cases, I'd have more of a, 10,000 feet effect on them. It would be more big picture, like we need more illustrations, or that's not a good cover. In terms of the content, I'd look closely at the outline, but basically Dan Wallace and Ryder Wyndham, those guys are so good that they would go for it and run with it. And Leland Chi, the continuity or keeper of the holocron at that time, would check it in that sense. And they, there's a copy editor, and the publisher has their own editor. So I didn't have much input in terms of the actual content of the book. Like the Jedi Path, because it was the big case that opened and all that. That was a huge amount of work. That went on for months and months and months, and I had getting the sounds right when it opened and that sort of thing. I was very involved in that.
Okay.
Each book is different. The DK book, the year by year chronology book, which is one of my favorite books, that was a huge amount of work, and that when I was very involved with every single word, letter, so to speak. So it really depends on the book. But
there's a listener question about Star Wars: The Old Republic Encyclopedia, one which you edited, but of course the writers were all the writers from Star Wars: The Old Republic, and they just want to know, as an editor, what are some of the ways that you're able to fit so much information, both visually and with words, to cover so much topic, so many details in some of these books, without skimping on either the visuals or the written content? Like what are some things that you've learned as an editor to be able to make the best out of all these out of every page?
We're talking about the 3-volume encyclopedia?
I believe that's what they're talking about, yes.
Yeah. Well, you can tell that's one of those books where early on we realized we needed 3 volumes because it was never going to fit in one volume. And then, once you get into page count, you have to be aware of what kind of binding you're going to use, and whether you don't want people to get it home and have all the pages fall out. We're very concerned about the book, the Macquarie book went on that's coming out. There were a lot of discussions about whether it should be 2 volumes or 3 volumes or 1 volume, and ultimately, 2 volumes was hit. So you make those kind of decisions early on and try and get in as much as you can. For the making of Empire and Jedi and Star Wars, I said up front, we're not going to skimp. It's going to be the page count that it needs to be, and that's it. And it worked out well. There's no major stories that were left on the cutting room floor. And, at first, I think the first one was originally going to be 324 pages, and then at the last second, they went up to 50 pages for the hardcover edition. And then afterwards, they were all 372 pages, which was great.
Here's another listener question. They say, with the newer books by DK, Lucas Publishing or Disney Publishing, whoever is doing it, will occasionally do like an updated version, like the Star Wars Character Encyclopedia. And they just want to know, was there ever talk of doing an updated version of Rogue Leaders, the story of LucasArts, that I believe covered through 2008, especially with LucasArts closing? Was there ever talk about doing an updated version of that to cover the end of the story with LucasArts and some of the 1313, more of the Old Republic, KOTOR, right, and stuff like that talk?
There was talk of it, but, there is the, publishing world, and they generally, people want to hang it on something. we didn't hang that book on anything except the anniversary. I think we wanted to wait till there was some sort of big. At one point, 1313 was going to come out, and there was talk of maybe hanging it on that release. But it sort of just fell by the wayside, and now I don't know if there's ever plans to update it. Although it would be a good idea. It certainly would be a good idea.
Because that book's like literally one of the most one-of-a-kind books I've ever read. Because I don't know of a single other book that dives into LucasArts like that one did. And there's so much more they could talk about, even in the last few years of that company.
Yeah. Well, the last few years were painful. And then, it's no longer the same regime. It's like several regimes removed. So, it may be a while before they circle back and do that.
Well, let's hope someday they do. Maybe it'll be an EA version for their stuff. But it would be really nice to just be able to dive into some of these lesser-known stuff. Because, go on.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that happened in the aftermath of that book is that they actually, when we did it, the LucasArts archives, which just all the 2D art, wasn't organized, and then it got organized. And I was working with Disney on trying to do sort of just a giant art of LucasArts, because there's a ton of great art. But that, again, it just sort of fell by the wayside.
So we have a listener question about the Star Wars, the comic book. And they just want to know, being how familiar you were to the making of A New Hope in general, of course, knowing all these original scripts and so on, with how much background information you have, did that make it easier to write the comic book version, or harder since you just knew so much about the entire process in general?
Well, it made it easier, but really with the comic book, what I wanted to do was just stay true to George's vision from back then. I didn't want to contaminate it by saying, bringing in sort of an anachronism. But if you knew that what he was talking about was the X-Wing fighter, then you made it look like an X-Wing fighter. But he did know that early on. We tried to make it historically accurate to his mindset. There was a character that was really sort of big and fat, and we thought, well, that's really early Jabba. So, the artist, Mike Mayhew, took very early Jabba sketches where he was more humanoid and kind of riffed off of that. And the early Ralph McQuarrie paintings of Obi-Wan Kenobi looked a lot like George, so he kind of made that into General Skywalker. So there was that kind of stuff, and so it definitely helped. And I mean, to know all that stuff, it made it easier. And really, what got that project off the ground was that I've told this story a few times, so stop me if I'm boring you.
No, it's fine.
You've probably heard it already, but at first George said no to that project, and then he had this series of books he wanted to do, these Star Wars art books, and one of them we did was Star Wars art comics, and he was telling me several times how much he liked storytelling that was purely visual. It didn't need dialogue, and would show me the comic book pages that he liked that were like that. So when Dark Horse independently said they also wanted to do this comic book adaptation, I said, look, the only way we're going to do it is if you guys hire an artist, I'll write up a few scenes, and this guy illustrates them, but with no dialogue, and we'll show them to George, and maybe he'll say yes. So they said okay, and they paid for it. Randy Stradley handled that, and I wrote up a few scenes. We gave them to George, and at that point, I just sent it over as a memo and said, look, here's 10 pages. When he saw that we were going to do it in a kind of visual storytelling way, then he was okay with it.
The art in general of that comic series is one of my favorites of the Star Wars ones, because it when it comes to that's second to me. Only one better is like Dave Dorman covers, and it's some great stuff in that.
Yeah, those were fun. They were really fun. One of my heroes is Jim Steranko, so we got to do a riff on a Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. cover with Anakin Starkiller floating out in space. That was a geeky moment, I think.
Well, having made all these making of books, and you've written some some fiction books, how long does it take to write like a comic like that? If it's fiction, it goes a lot faster because you don't have to
consult, 14 documents before you know what the hell you're writing. It goes a lot faster, and having a good editor like Randy made it, pretty smooth. Because I'd never written comic books up when I was 12 years old. He kind of had to mentor me for the first issue, and then once I got a hang of it, it went smooth. I think the first issue I probably rewrote it 3 times, and then after that, or maybe 4 times. But after that, it was first draft, second draft done.
Wow. Okay, so here's another listener one. He says he's a huge fan of all your making of books, and just want to know, as the writer and editor of these, did you also have an input on the enhanced ebooks, on what videos and audio extras get to be added onto the ebook version of these, which are completely different experience from reading the book physically?
Oh yeah, it was 100% me. Again, not to blow my own horn, but that was my responsibility. I went to the film archive, that's another archive, in a different building over at Skywalker, and spent, weeks just going through. It was great. They had these old Steenbeck editing tables, archives there. It was just great. And it's not that organized, because they just never got around to it. And so we just pick up stuff randomly and say, "Well, what's on this reel?" And we just found incredible stuff occasionally. And that was a lot of fun. And then I went back through the old audio tapes, and there was this holy grail, which Matthew Woods, this guy Sound, had told me that he had heard some tape of George doing the ADR with Alec Guinness, and how to how to say the Force will be with you, all of his stuff like that he says while Luke is, flying the X-Wing and things like that. And I thought, we've got to find that. And we just couldn't find it. And then one day, when I arrived there, Monica was like, "I've got good news for you." Somehow she found the tape, and it was just audio. There was no visual. And that was just great, That's just priceless. George sort of coaching Alec Guinness, who unfortunately passed away. But this really incredible moment for the Star Wars universe of what inflection to use, like the Force will be with you always, that stuff. And then we found the blooper reel too, that was funny too, because first we found only the visual side. We couldn't find the sound. And then Monica found the sound, and we were able to sync that stuff up, and we were able to digitize the stuff. It was a lot of work. And then it was sort of heartbreaking because the publisher just completely dropped the ball on any publicity for that stuff. To this day, I think most fans don't know that stuff is out there on these enhanced ebooks. Because there's stuff you can't find anywhere else on those things, on Blu-ray, extras, whatever. It's only on these ebooks. And if you read it, I think it's another experience. You get to hear George talking about his original, like from before the movie came out, talking about his inspiration for Star Wars. There's a lot of good stuff on this thing.
Speaking of George, we know the Lucasfilm Disney deal happened at the end, last quarter or so of 2012, but you had some books such as Making Return of the Jedi, I believe Blueprints came out, the Star Wars, the Clone Wars episode guide, and so on. Did you still get to talk with George and have input from George after the sale happened and Kathleen Kennedy and so on came in, or was that stuff already done pretty much by then?
Well, Jedi was already done. It was at the publisher by the time that happened, because it takes a long time for them to print those books. So George, we'd already had our long talk about Jedi. We already done the Clone Wars was done. That just took a long time to get made, and became one of those lost ones. But and Kathleen Kennedy was there before the sale too. But once he did the sale, I only saw him 2 or 3 times after the sale. And one time I went over to show him some stuff from the comic book, and he basically said, because he'd really wanted to see everything for the comic book. He wanted to see all the concept art and everything. So I went over there to show it to him, and then he said, "Yeah, you know what? I can't deal with this anymore. Show it to Kathleen Kennedy. I'm done with this." He was definitely, that's why he sold the company. He was done with that stuff. So, most of it was done. I had only saw him a couple times. I saw him at Lauren Peterson's 70th birthday party, and then I saw him again at some award that he was getting from the San Francisco Museum of Art. But since then, I haven't seen him probably in a couple of years now. Yeah, probably in a couple of years.
There's one more question about this, and then we gotta talk on your next project so you can promote it. From making Revenge of the Sith through making Return of the Jedi, how did you as the writer change your process of interviewing George? Did you two get more familiar and more open with each other? Did it change throughout the years, or did you just learn what to ask and what not to ask as your process? I'm assuming changed a bit over the years of writing those books and interacting with him and others so closely.
Well, it definitely changed, but it started off really well because it took a long time, because George is a shy person, as many people have said, and I was being in these art departments, and I was sort of the art department meetings, or episode 3, and I was sort of the new person, and I wasn't an artist. I was just kind of there taking notes. And I never bugged him, and then I went to the set. I didn't bug him there either. And I think he appreciated the fact that I was just doing my job. And eventually we had a couple sort of longer talks on set. And then for episode 3, he read the manuscript, and we had a long, almost 3-hour talk. And I think, if you're that famous or whatever, you get a lot of interviews where they're asking you the same questions over and over, and they're very superficial. And most of the time, 90% of the time or more, you're being interviewed by somebody who really doesn't know the subject very well. But in this case, I knew the subject, almost as well as him and Rick McCallum, except for a few people like John Knoll, maybe. I knew everything because I'd studied, the documents, read the scripts, and so I wanted to talk to him besides, things like, what do you think of Luke Skywalker or whatever, or Anakin, and I asked him about editing and music, and I could tell that he was really enjoying it. It was really forcing him in a good way to sort of, not forcing him, but enabling him to talk about things he never got to talk about. And then when we did Star Wars, at the same time we were doing Star Wars frames, and so that was a process where I'd be sitting with him and Mike Blanchard every week for about anywhere between 2 and 8 hours, going through these frames one by one, literally. And one day he came in, he was super excited because he'd read the manuscript for the making of Star Wars, and he just started spontaneously telling me about it. So that was like a pre-interview kind of brain dump. So I think it was, for him, it was always kind of hard because they were in some ways painful experiences. So I did get to know him, and I knew there were certain subjects he wouldn't be too crazy to talk about. But in fact, one of them was his divorce on Jedi, and I wasn't going to talk about it at all. But I figured that was really none of my business. And he brought it up during the interview. And so, I felt as an employee, basically still just a writer/employee, that it was a very wonderful thing. At least, I felt like I was learning a lot. He probably felt it was a drag, but I was having a great time. And he, I'm sure if he thought it was really a drag, he wouldn't have done it. So, yeah, it definitely was a great series of interviews that seemed to happen every year or so from about 2005 to 2011 or so. Because I talked to him, we had other books too that were going on at one point or other, like The Cinema of George Lucas. I just sat in on that one. I asked a few questions, but that was a long interview. And then there was a book, Cinema by the Bay, which was going to be where that was a really long interview. And then George wanted to do a book on digital cinema, which never got off the ground. But I did a very long interview where basically I barely had to ask him anything, and he told me the whole history of sort of digital cinema from his point of view.
And you weren't involved in that book he did about the history of cinema, the blockbusting one, were you?
And that one only in the very beginning, because originally Lucy Wilson, who is basically the first Lucasfilm employee, she was the head of publishing. She's the one who hired me. She started in 1974, and originally she brought me onto those projects as the editor. George wanted to do these books, and we had like 5 or 6 topics. But then she was split off when we moved to Big Rock. She stayed at Skywalker, and then I wasn't really involved. The only one that I was really involved with for any length of time was the Cinema by the Bay one, which originally was called Fog City Mavericks.
So, we'd be sad if we didn't bring up this stuff, but, since 2013, I think is when the Star Wars came out, but also that's when your award-winning animated short film, Riddle of the Black Cat, came out. Since then, you've definitely been diving more into the more fictional side, the less non-fiction, the more, I don't know if it's more creative, but the more fictional side and so on. What's it like being able to dive into stuff like Riddle of the Black Cat and getting at such a good response from that Edgar Allan Poe tale? And, you said you're working on a book right now that's about to come out. Why don't we talk about some of that, the projects you're doing now?
Sure. Well, the Edgar Allan Poe was a, sort of long gestating project. I used to teach Americans. I used to live in France and Paris, and I used to teach a course on American literature, and I loved the Black Cat. And I thought Edgar Allan Poe was sort of playing a game with the reader, sort of forcing the reader to be a detective. And as you guys probably know, Edgar Allan Poe kind of created the whole modern detective with Murders in the Rue Morgue and this sort of scientific approach to figuring stuff out. And I think, so I thought Black Cat was like that. It seemed like there were clues planted in the story. Whether it's a story about a guy being sort of tortured by the supernatural in the form of this black cat, or whether he is a kind of very calculated psychopath. And at the same time, right around the time Edgar Allan Poe wrote the story, they created the insanity plea in England, and it was going to be adopted in America. And I think Poe, it's just conjecture on my part, but I think Poe might have been fascinated by that idea, and like, well, let's see about a guy sort of basically trying to get off on the insanity plea, but showing, I'm tipping my hand here, but showing that he's not really insane. And so in order to do that, I took Dupin from Murders in the Rue Morgue and made him into a detective and talked Greg Knight into doing an animated thing, but we had no budget at all. So we could only do sort of keyframe art, but Greg did a really great job, and I got Chris Vibberts to do the music, which I think is great. And, it was just fun. And then we got into a number of festivals. And I would like to do more. I have an idea for a few more, but I have no more money. I don't have time to raise it right now. So I'm hoping is that, I'm writing this novel. I'm hoping that I'll be able to sell the novel and then raise money for a few more animated stuff. I have, an idea for a half an hour one, which would be fun. But do it full on animation.
Are you able to talk about your novel you're working on now, or any details about what you're currently working on with that novel?
No, I can't mention it. No, because it's all, I guess, top secret.
Just stay tuned, and we'll find out eventually.
Stay tuned. Hopefully, it'll be out. I'm guessing not next year, although maybe next year, but probably 2018. So if you guys want to have me back on, I'll be glad to blab on about that. It might. I'd
love it.
Might be something that interests you guys. I hope so.
I am not opposed to this. In fact, I will.
We got to wrap this up now. So, where can people find more of your work, find more of your questions? I know there's lots of questions which, the character Rinzler was named after you because it was on the coffee table. That's on your website. Where can people find more of your musings, your stuff, updates? If they want to keep track of what you're up to now, where should they go?
They go to jwrinzler.com, and also my Twitter thing. I don't tweet that often right now, but I will when I have time, once the book starts ramping up in terms of the publication. So yeah, what is it? It's at JW Rinzler on Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, sir. This has been an honor, and I'm glad that we finally were able to get you on. And you've given us lots of stories that we'd love to hear, and it's definitely a period of Star Wars which is now past, but we have lots of Star Wars and stuff to look forward to in the future. So I'm glad that we're able to capture some of these stories before people forget that era.
Yeah, well, thanks. No, I appreciate you guys being tenacious and tracking me down, and I thank you for all the work it takes to get this thing up there, and I'm sorry that I have no short-term memory.
Don't worry, we'll have one for you.
But thank you so much, and good luck with those deadlines.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's been a real honor. Thank you.